What was the name of Gotham City's mayor?
The answer in a moment.
Holy bad guys, Batfans. If you thought that Joker was wild, get a load of Archer, Bookworm, Catwoman, Egghead, Fingers, King Tut, Lord Fog, Mad Hatter, Minstrel, Mr. Freeze, Nora Clavicle, Penguin, Riddler, Shane, Delta the Great, and many more.
How about trying this one for size?
It's Bad Guys from A to Z on the Batman Hour. Weekdays at 5 on Channel 11.
The mayor of Gotham City was none other than Mayor Linseed.
More Batman to come.
We have already seen a beauty queen kidnapped. And an indoor blizzard. Only one man could keep a cool that cool. While the dynamic duo dynamite a door. The Iceman cometh with a delivery of what? Green ice? Bribe money? Anyway, that's what the papers seemed to feel. But Bruce Wayne still had the social responsibilities of any average millionaire. Though there was a surprise guest at his garden reception. Several surprising guests, in fact. And a freezing finale to the affair. So back to the capes and cowls. And a stop at the Frosty Freezies factory, where Robin tangled with a freeze gun. And the dynamic duo found themselves with a choice of very frosty flavors. Fooled, framed, and frozen. Frosty Freezies instead of crime fighters. What now? What next?
Welcome back, citizens, to an all-new episode of the Batcave podcast. It's your old bat chum, John S. Drew here, and once again, we're looking at a second season episode of the Batman 66 series, this time taking a look at a returning villain, Mr. Freeze. But he's looking a little different this time. So since he's looking a little different, why don't we bring in a different guest host here to help me talk about this two-part Mr. Freeze episode. This time around, I brought in Mr. Dan Greenfield, he of the mighty 13thdimension.com website. This man is the creator, the writer, the editor, along with a team of other writers that, well, Dan, welcome to the podcast. Tell us about the 13th Dimension. I think it's always best that you put it in your own words.
Well, thanks, John, and thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a website we started actually about a year ago. My partner and I, Cliff Galbraith. There's kind of a twisty-turny story behind the website. But what we basically do is then and now, and we cover a lot of what's going on in comics now and write about what is that's going on in comics today. But we also do a lot of retro stuff. And as part of it, I personally do a Batman blog sort of within the site. And as part of that, I do a ton of Batman 66 coverage because that's really where it all started for me. When I started getting into comics and getting into Batman, it all started with Adam West and Burt Ward and Julie Newmar and all of that. And so since last year when they announced the merchandise, and then, of course, recently when they announced the show was going to be out on Blu-ray and DVD, we've just been doing a ton of it. We've interviewing the actors and doing a lot of merchandise coverage. So we're really, really, really into the whole thing, and I appreciate you really having me on the show because I could talk about this show all day long. So thank you.
I saw that on your website. You've been a fan starting with, like you said, with Adam West and such since you were 5. Are you a syndication baby or are you first run?
I'm syndication baby. Okay. I like that. I like that term. That's awesome. I'm 47.
Same age as me.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so, and we're in the same area. We're both in the New York area. Did you grow up around this area?
Oh, yeah, the Bronx.
Okay, see, I grew up in New Jersey, and Channel 11,
Channel 11, PIX.
Yeah, PIX, and that's where we used to watch it. And when I was a little kid, I lived for this show. It was everything. And I would wear my cloth Ben Cooper Batman outfit to the supermarket. I mean, I loved this show. And, of course, that grew into Migos and grew into Filmation. And then all of a sudden, I'm outside a store and I see on a spinner rack comic books, which I didn't even realize, to me, Batman was TV before he was even comics. And from there, it was Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, and then onward and onward and onward, and here we are today. But, yeah, I used to watch that show, and my friends watched it, and my sister watched it. We all watched it. And when the occasional period would happen when they would take it off Channel 11 for whatever, when they would change up their schedule, it was like devastating. It's like, oh, bring it back. And inevitably it came back. The toughest part about having it on Channel 11 is when on Channel 7 on the 4:30 movie, when they had Superhero Week and they'd run the Batman movie at the same time that Channel 11 would have the episode on, and you'd be switching back and forth during commercials.
I remember that. Now, all right, let me ask you this then before we get into actually discussing this episode, because this is something I'm seeing among fandom. When it comes to this series, there are so many of these, and I'm going to say it with air quotes, Batman purists who say that the 66 show was a downtime for Batman in many respects, Batman a joke, yada, yada, yada. Now, you come from the perspective, like me, of seeing Batman on TV. For me, Batman was Adam West on TV or Ulan Sewell as the voice of Batman on the Super Friends. It was that more friendly, approachable Batman in both those iterations there and such. So when you started reading the comic books, when you started seeing this darker, because they say even in the Denny O'Neil run, he was still walking down the street and waving at people and such. Yeah. So, I mean, how did you reconcile that? Did you...
I'll tell you, and I think that people who call it a downtime are people who... Well, look, I'm not going to... That's not fair for me. I'll speak from my own perspective. And this may resonate with some people and not with others. But for me, it worked like this. I watched the show, loved the show. Watched the Filmation, or I didn't even know they were called Filmation at the time. It was the Batman cartoon. Right. I was never a big Super Friends fan all that much, but I loved the Filmation cartoons that I do now. When I discovered the comics, I loved the comics, and I was able to, and I had Migos too, and if you remember the Migos, first off, they were the only action figures that you could get with Superman, Batman, whatever, and they were friendly images too. So that that's actually another aspect of this in terms of how you see Batman and how you would kind of perceive him. And not to put too fine a point on it, but the older I got, particularly when I became a teenager. The thing about being a teenager is you're trying to figure out what you like and what you don't like, and you're trying to figure out what embarrasses you and what doesn't. A lot of stuff embarrasses you when you're a teenager. So from the time that I was a teenager and you're starting to get into The Dark Knight and Batman Year One and all that stuff, I did anyway, and I know a lot of other people did too, I rejected the Adam West show. I said, oh, that's not the real Batman, because I didn't want to be embarrassed. If I would tell people I was into Batman or into comics or whatever, everybody thought it was Adam West, and they'd look at you like you were a 5-year-old, and I was like, no, you don't understand. This is art, man. And so I actually rejected the show for a good period of time and said, oh, that was silly, that was stupid, that was dumb. And I, was really excited when the Tim Burton movie came out. I was like, yeah, man, that's great. It's all dark and grim and gritty. And of course, in retrospect, it's not that dark and grim and gritty at all. Yeah. But what happened was, as it so often does, is that the older I became, the more I began to appreciate not only just what that show was for its own self, for what it was, but also what it meant to me. And how much it informed so much of my own thinking growing up. And again, not to overstate it, but the moral code, the sense of loyalty, the humor, the fact that you can love something and make fun of it at the same time. It's like a family member. It's that thing where you tease members of your family sometimes in ways that you don't tease anybody else because you can, and it's because you love them. It's like the old joke that I said, I tease because I love. And I absolutely adore that show as much as I love reading Batman Year One. And I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. And I think that a lot of people have come to accept that. I think there's been a real full circle aspect of it. And part of it is because it's been almost 50 years now. and that since society and since pop culture has now come to, in a way, Batman 66 has become more acceptable because of the Christopher Nolan movies. That now that the world knows about Batman being this dark avenger of the night, and that's the accepted version, now people are kind of like, no, the Adam West thing is a lot of fun too. And I think that that's actually helped drive a lot of people's very public acceptance of it, and certainly has driven what's going on right now with Warner Brothers and DC and that whole world going into overdrive. This thing has been phenomenal in the last year or so. I know that that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but that kind of is how it all developed for me over the last 40 years.
Very well put, too. Thank you. Because when I did this podcast, when I started it, my first thing was, I love Batman. I want to do podcasts. And I do another podcast called Cyborgs, a Bionic Podcast, which is a very honest look at a show that had some wonderfully great moments, and then there are others that are just gut-wrenchingly horrible. And, along the way I've discovered certain things that as a childhood never held up, and then other things that as a child I hated and now I love.
Right. Yep.
And I'm discovering the same thing in many respects with Batman. But Batman took on a different thing as well. After the first or second episode that I recorded, I quickly realized that this has more of a focus to it, because I would hear all that about, The Dark Knight and Batman Year One and all that other stuff. And I realized that in some ways I'm trying to justify my love for this show. And I know people say you should never justify anything. If it makes you happy, that should be it. But as I move along here, and as I meet with new people and such, just to get this sense that I'm not alone, for one thing, in thinking, certain things were great about the show, certain other things were not so great. And overall, though, this is an entity that holds up still 50 years later.
Yes.
For one thing. And there's nothing wrong with, as you mentioned, the moral values that it expounds on in the show. I think there was probably, and that may have also been part of it in the 80s and 90s, where we were all too hip for our own good.
Yeah. Yeah, it very much was I remember seeing the Tim Burton movie for the first time, and I was living in Boston at the time, and I saw it at a special screening, and I remember I had this euphoric feeling like finally the world's going to get to see the real Batman. Right. And a lot of it was because of this thing. It was this rejection of the Adam West thing, and I just find that, it comes with maturity. You do get to a point where you learn that it's okay to love the things you love regardless. And then you fall all of a sudden, and the internet helps with a lot of this too, is you see that, man, I'm not alone here. There's thousands of other people. And clearly the marketers and manufacturers have figured that out too. Yes. And I think that for a lot of fans, particularly fans who are comic book fans, look back and they see that there have been so many different versions that you can pick and choose now. You can really look at, you can have your favorite versions, and you can have more than one. You don't have to, it's not an either or proposition any longer. And the other thing, if you are a comic book reader, I think people like Grant Morrison kind of helped with this in a subtle way, because the story that he wrote over 7 years lifted a lot from various aspects of Batman's histories. And a lot of it was stuff that had been rejected, the goofy alien stuff, and a lot of that early Silver Age stuff where it was, aliens and time travel and all that stuff. He made it acceptable, and he kind of pointed readers in a direction and say, this stuff is okay. This stuff actually has a place. And then I think actually from the cartoon Batman Brave and the Bold, which also, if you recall at the very beginning, a lot of fans were like, no, you're going backward. You can't do this. You're making him too bright. But it ultimately was a very successful show, had some really great moments. And I think that also helped people accept, because good stories are good stories. It allowed people to say, you know what, it's okay that you can tease this stuff, and it's it's going to survive it, and people will understand it, people will enjoy it. And I remember, before we talk about the Mr. Freeze episode, there was an early episode of Batman Brave and the Bold, which was of all things a Batmite episode, where they did a little scene at a comic convention where someone says, "This isn't my Batman," and they actually have like it's a very meta speech that basically says cool it. You know what? You can have this version, you can have that version, but they don't all have to be the same. And frankly, it's okay to be, to have these different versions because it's all Batman. And that's kind of the philosophy I subscribe to now. I don't judge anymore.
Let's talk about the cool, cruel, as Filmation used to say, Mr. Yes. Freeze. We've got a 2-part episode, Green Ice and Deep Freeze. Once again, no rhyme scheme for the titles. These episodes aired November 9th and 10th, 1966 on the ABC network. Now, one of the things I've been commenting on is that, quite often in the second season, we're moving away from those elements in some respects, and it's for the economy of storytelling. We're moving away from those elements that we were used to in the first season. We don't get, for instance, once the crime is committed, we don't get a whole lengthy scene with Dick and Bruce talking to each other. We cut right to it where Bruce comes in and he gets the phone and such from Alfred. But the opening scene itself is really good. In particular, what I love is we get a shot of 5th Avenue and 40th Street in New York, the corner there, right outside New York Public Library's main branch.
A beastly hot day in Gotham City. Rare indeed for a metropolis which generally enjoys perfect weather. But what better time of year for Gotham City's annual Miss Galaxy contest, for which the 5 remaining contestants are already preparing this morning for tonight's final event. And 5 beauties they are indeed. Miss Corsica, Miss Canary Islands, Miss Barrier Reef, the local favorite, Miss Gotham City herself, and Miss Iceland.
The thing is, though, is that we get another opportunity, and this is, I don't know, maybe it's just the old man in me, the feminist or what. We get another opportunity to see girls in bathing suits because We've got another beauty contest going on here as Mr. Freeze and his men come in and kidnap Miss Iceland from the beauty pageant's dressing room. And, I mean, granted, they're all one piece. They're all, by today's standards, they're pretty tame. But still, for the 60s, it was like, wow. And it was kind of a lingering shot on the ladies as he's leaving and such. But I do like the next scene because Gordon goes over, as dutiful fanboy that he is. It's like, we can't do this. He doesn't even give O'Hara a chance. He just cuts him off. We got to call him in. And there's Freeze in the ventilation system, which we've never seen before.
Commissioner! I wonder if Batman will welcome the air conditioning. Wild!
And he just shoots at the two of them with his gun as Gordon places the call. And Alfred picks up the phone, and it's just this... It's these little moments, these short lines that we see in the second season that have me laughing out loud because there's Gordon.
And in Wayne Manor, stately home of millionaire Bruce Wayne and his youthful ward, Dick Grayson.
Help!
Naturally, sir.
Yeah. I know. It's great. It's true. And you're right. It's just that, and to me, that's the wit of the show. It's like Alfred, by this time, he's seen it all. He's like, yes okay, I'll go get him. Yeah.
I was thinking that too. He's totally nonplussed because he's seen it all. Yeah. And then equally so, along comes Bruce to take the call, and he's like, the commissioner, I think he was trying to tell me something. the naivete of, Bruce Batman, at times is just... It's nice. This is granted, we call him the world's greatest detective. We say he's got this sharp mind, but yet sometimes he misses the most obvious things in front of him.
Right.
But that's part of the love. That's part of the charm of the character and such. We cut to a nice shot of outside the commissioner's office as we come into Act 1 of the episode after coming out of the credits and such. And... we don't get to see directly outside the commissioner's office too often, but we see there's an elevator bank and everything that the two come out of. Although I've got to admit, now, was this the first time that James O'Hara, who plays that officer who appeared in a bunch of episodes, is that the first time he's given a name?
I have no idea.
Because
I don't know, yeah.
Because they call him Officer Man. He's not credited as such anywhere else, but I remember Batman saying that to him, because he's chiding him. You know, Batman chides him for proclaiming Gordon dead when it's like, hold on.
Thinking the worst.
Yeah. Don't jump to conclusions. Batman does this a lot in this episode. He chides a lot of people.
Yeah, Robin
in particular.
Especially, yeah.
But I love it. Once they get inside with the use of explosives and such, and, you know, Batman, again, nice little touch, just a little sliding on the ice there and such. They revive Gordon and O'Hara, and there's Gordon.
No matter how thick the battle, no matter how heavy the frost, no matter who you really are or where you ever come from, I knew I could depend on you, Batman.
Oh my God, I love you.
Yeah, it was. It was a declaration of love, and even it's great because it is actually very funny because you've got Batman warming him up. You know, he's like rubbing him down, and he's like, "Come on, Commissioner," you know, whatever. And he says, "I knew you wouldn't let me down." And Batman pauses for a second, and he kind of has this look on his face, and then he continues. And it's a great little double entendre that's the wink of the show, that also, again, you completely miss it when you're a kid, but as an adult, it just makes you laugh out loud.
As we go through these episodes, I try not to go into great detail about the plot, but I do bring up certain plot elements. I'm not a huge fan of this particular episode of Mr. Freeze. And here's why. Because we're getting into the first of several similar scenes with Freeze and Miss Iceland. He has her locked up in this cell. He's going to force her to love him, which I think is a great idea. And in fact, I think that in some respects, you know, as I'm watching it, I'm wondering if, you know, that's where part of also that whole thing with Victor Freeze, like especially in the animated series, I remember his obsession with saving his love. But he's going to force her by lowering her body temperature to his so that, you know, he could basically, you know, freeze out all the anger she has at him and such.
Right.
The problem is that as the episode goes on, every time there's a scene with the two of them, they're basically saying the same lines.
Yeah, I will never love you. Oh, yes, you will. Wild. You know, yeah, it's yes, I agree. Those actually, I think, are the best parts of the episode. Actually don't involve that aspect at all. I think the best parts of the episode are the other, particularly, not to jump ahead, the party scene, which I think it's not only a highlight of the episode, I think that's a highlight of the series. But I go on with what you were saying.
I agree with you. We'll get to that too. I definitely agree with you with the whole pool scene there for a number of reasons. Well, so they do their little, you know, lines back and forth, and we cut back to later at Police Commissioner Gordon's office, where now there's a press conference. The press have been called in. It's the first time we're dealing with the press since the Batman movie.
But why can't we find out what happened? Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara nearly freeze to death in this office on the hottest day of the year, and nobody can or will give us any details whatsoever.
Please, gentlemen of the press. And this attractive young lady?
Nellie Majors, Gotham City Herald. As if you didn't know.
I ask you all to be patient. Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara will give you the details later. As you can see, it's been a rather harrowing experience.
That's what our readers buy, Batman. Harrowing experiences. Has this anything to do with the kidnapping of Miss Iceland today?
Miss Iceland kidnapped?
Holy hijack!
And might it involve a certain arch criminal who escaped from the state penitentiary last week in an ice cream truck?
It just might, Nellie.
Yes, it's very possible Mr. Freeze has started another cold wave of terror.
Robin, since when do we make public accusations without strong, solid proof? Robin's indiscreet statement is strictly off the record.
Not off my record, Batman.
I'm sorry, Miss Majors. I certainly wasn't suggesting what your papers should or should not print. It's just that I feel...
That you're on a spot, Batman? Is that it? Oh, I know you're a well-known crime fighter and a local hero. But I've seen many heroes tarnished in the course of my career.
Nellie, I will not have the Caped Crusader spoken to like that in this office.
You too, Commissioner? Something to hide?
Nellie Majors. Another flaw I've got with this is because, to me, anytime you bring in characters like this, I expect more out of them. I don't know, in the sense of, I mean, she was fine. Her performance was fine. She was, tough as nails, being, right there on Batman's case, Gordon's case and such. But I expected her to play more of a role into the plot, because a little later on, even Freeze comments about how helpful she's been. And I just I was waiting to see if maybe they were going to, all she was there was just to antagonize. And that was it. And it was like, to me, I thought, there's a waste of a plot point that you could have killed some of the scenes between Freeze and Iceland going back and forth, going, you will love me, no, I won't, with maybe something more with Nellie. And then also just the fact that I thought maybe, she could have appeared in future episodes.
Yeah, because she would have been like a great opposite of the Vicky Vale, where you do have this sort of antagonistic member of the media who's always trying to poke holes in the Batman mystique. And you're right, it is a good idea. In this case, you're right. She's really kind of the MacGuffin. She's there basically to turn the city against Batman, to give a reason for Batman to be kind of back on his heels. Which, of course, is absurd. The idea, we have so established by this time, particularly in the series history, because this is not only just the second season episode, it's toward the end of the second season. The idea that anybody would even believe that Batman would be corrupt by this time is, of course, absurd, which is funny in and of itself. But that's really what she's there to do. She's there to be the catalyst for Batman to kind of be on his heels and not just dealing with Mr. Freeze, but also dealing with the public perception of him.
And it doesn't help any matters either that as he's avoiding being forthcoming on what's happening in this current situation and such, including, discussing, Miss Iceland's, which I thought was weird. She brings up Miss Iceland's kidnapping and Batman's like, she was kidnapped? Like, nobody told me this.
Yeah, it is weird.
He's a little blindsided by all that. Yeah. But there's further complications when an ice delivery is made, and the ice, green ice, is filled with money for Batman.
Yeah.
And it says
incidental crime expenses.
Yes, right on the block of ice, in case you didn't get it.
So true.
Yeah. But it certainly gives the press a story, so off they go to type their...
Come on, fellas, let's get out of here.
Yes. Yeah. One thing I will say I do like is, because we then cut back to Mr. Freeze's place, which we now learn is a seemingly abandoned cold storage plant, as William Dozier describes it and such. They even discuss the fact that Miss Iceland's kidnapping has taken a backseat to Batman's disgrace. But Freeze is fine with that, because that's really his main plot. And he once again draws on an old chestnut that he did in the first episode. He's got his thugs dressing up as Batman and this time Robin.
Right.
Now, my question to you is this. One of the things I'm always impressed with is when the thugs have a bit of a character to them. They really didn't in this, but they did have names, Chill and Shivers. But were they the same villains or the same people once they dressed up as Batman and Robin, or was that suddenly now the stunt doubles just taking their place?
I don't know, actually. I wondered that myself. I don't know if it's the same actors or not. I don't know. That you probably can look it up somewhere, but I mean, obviously in the credits it's pretty... there's the credits don't tell you much as far as that goes.
Right.
But yeah, I figured that was Batman. That's Robin's stunt double, and the Batman I'm not sure because I'm just not sure.
Yeah. But he's done this before, where he's used doubles of Batman to as part of his plan. So he's got them all set to go. Now down in the Batcave, Batman's got the Bat computer going, trying to guess Mr. Freeze's next move, proving no success. And I love this. We get a nice shot. It's always funny how the Bat computer is angled. It's always placed in a place that is convenient for whatever we need to do in the scene. So this time, it's towards the back of the Batcave, just in front of Alfred's elevator. So this way we can see Alfred getting off the elevator and coming out to let him know. It is tuxedo, too. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, he's in a tuxedo. Something's going on here. To remind them about the poolside reception for the Wayne Foundation. They get, upstairs, Bruce and Dick.
What could have happened to Bruce and Dick?
He'll be here any moment, madam.
Oh, here they are now.
We get to see outside the living room.
Sorry, Aunt Harriet, a slight delay.
I lost a coupling.
Well, I think everyone's here. Alfred asked the caterer to start passing the hors d'oeuvres.
They already are, madam, but I'll check again below stairs.
My first thought when they said, though, the poolside reception was I was expecting something a little longer and a little deeper.
Beautiful, Aunt Harriet. You've outdone yourself as usual.
You really like it? I originally planned to have it all Japanesey, but the caterer called and suggested Irish. He said green was most becoming to women guests. What do you think?
Green?
I even had the reflection pool dyed green.
Mrs. Cooper's a clever colleen, Bruce.
Yes. Who would have thought it? A wee bit of the Emerald Isle right outside of Gotham City.
You know, it's a
reflecting pool.
It's a reflecting pool, exactly.
Shamrocks. Emerald.
Also known among the criminal set as
green ice.
Stop! Don't move, anybody.
I always liked those dress-up scenes. You know, the Bruce and Dick out on the town when they were wearing tuxedos.
What in the world is this?
Let's get him quick.
Patience, Dick Grayson.
You've all heard me, so no monkey business.
Who is he? How dare he come here and spoil our nice party?
Maybe that special duty policeman.
The whole bit, the utter humiliation of having to get into the pool is just, I don't know why that cracks me up, and everybody's so indignant. They're so upset about it.
They're all indignant about it except Bruce, who's just,
right.
I think we should all get into the water, you know.
Right.
And you know, Aunt Harriet's the only one who sort of somewhat like, Bruce, do something, you know, and he's like, I'm getting into the water, you know.
Yeah, because he doesn't want to blow his cover.
He doesn't want to blow his cover, yeah.
Which, of course, is, again, that's always the great conceit of that character, is that in a city of 8 million people, okay, you've got this one guy, and if he dared to try to fight back, and they've done this a number of times in the series, it's like, you know, if I actually take him on, they might think I'm Batman. What? It makes no sense. It's this absurd notion that he could only be... No, I mean, he'd just be some guy who was trying to stand up for his friends or whatever. But he doesn't want to blow his cover. And even Dick is like, we got to go get him. We got to go get him. And he's like, no, Dick. We've got to do what they say. You know, he doesn't want to take the chance that anybody would think that he's Batman. I also like the bit where Commissioner Gordon is really upset that they're taking his watch because it was given to him by the great people of Gotham. Yes. This engraved watch. He's like, oh, no, you can't take the watch that they gave me at my chicken dinner.
Yeah. And then, you know, Batman and Robin show up to save the day.
Right.
But they're not Batman and Robin, obviously. This is, you know, Mr. Freeze's goons again, dressed up. And the two act like buffoons. I mean, they're just totally inept when it comes to fighting. The waiters are able to quickly take them out as they finish, you know, robbing the guests of the party. And again, nice touch where he freezes them in place so they can't go. So they can't go for help. So they're all just stuck there. I
love that. And of course, the payoff is that you don't realize that Alfred is not in the scene until the end of the scene, where he walks in and he sees everybody frozen in the pool and he goes, oh my, or something like that, or oh dear, and then it cuts to commercial. But I always like that too, for some reason, the idea of them all, and it's also a great shot. I always like the special effects of the Mr. Freeze freezing, you know, where they basically have this, you know, the still picture of whoever it is with that glowing, you know, around them. And in this case, they don't have that, but they have them all standing in the pool, and the matte painting or the special effects are such that it looks like it's frozen and that they're frozen in place. And I can't even explain why I find that so appealing, but I always thought that was such a neat idea, that it was like, okay, we're going to take off now. We've frozen all of you in a way that seemed so fitting for the scene.
Well, we come back after that scene. Batman is, you know, back down in the Batcave, working the Batcomputer, trying to find out locations where Mr. Freeze may be hiding out. And, see, again, he notes how Miss Iceland's kidnapping has been mostly ignored. When you start getting all the characters making these comments, you know, you're pointing out the flaws of the story in some ways. I don't know. But the Batcomputer spits out 3 possible locations. One of them gets Batman's attention. He even mentions it, the Frosty Freeze's factory right next door to the cold storage place. but instead he and Robin go off and investigate the other two first. You know, which is weird. I mean, granted, we don't see them doing that. Instead, we cut to one of the goons coming in with reindeer meat for Mr. Freeze, his midnight snack there, and pointing out that he just saw them at the meat packing place, you know, which was one of the locations, which is where he got the meat and such nice little tie-ins there and everything. And he's like, well, then he's going to be here soon if he's figured out this. So, you know, and of course, they wind up at Frosty Freeze factory. Now, here's a question, because I've seen this in a few... Was there actually a thing called Frosty Freeze at that time?
I don't know. I mean, it was Frosty Freezy, I think.
Freezy,
I think it's
right.
just... Yeah, I think it's just like, you know, they're snow cones. I mean, I think they just made it up for the show. I don't know for sure. I never thought to look it up or anything, but I think it's just... I mean, it is what it is. They're snow cones.
Right, snow cones. No, because I've read a few places where some people commented on the fact that it was product placement, because there's Robin, you know, listing off the flavors and all, and I was like thinking, I never got the feeling that this was product placement.
No, me neither. I just thought it was just all set up for the payoff of the fact that they're going to try to be made into human snow cones.
Yes.
And of course there was, you know, Tasty Freeze and Dairy Queen and Blizzards and all. I mean, I don't know if they had Blizzards in 1966, but I think it's just all set up for, you know, and again, it's they did that a lot where they would find the mundane fascinating. So there's Robin, he's all excited. Oh, look at all these great flavors. You know, there's raspberry and blah, 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 blah. And, of course, it's just set up. It's set up, and even not only the payoff of the fact that they're going to have the big fight scene and then get overpowered and try to make them into human Frosty Freezies, but also the William Dozier end of the episode narration.
Can this be happening? Batman being made into a pineapple Frosty Freezy, and Robin into a lime one? Has the diabolical Mr. Freeze outwitted the dynamic duo after all, with some fancy ice work? Hope for a miracle, and stay frozen in your seats. Until tomorrow, same time, same channel.
In the recap, at the start of episode 2, they show Batman and Robin walking through the Frosty Freeze factory. Did I miss something, you know, in my copy? I mean, I know that some of the episodes on the collection that I have are from TV Land, and they're the TV Land unedited, but it's got the TV Land blurb. But this looked like it was one of the 16mm transfers. It's even got the Place commercial here thing on. So I just was wondering if I missed something.
I don't know.
I don't remember them actually walking around the factory. It was just sort of, we cut to Robin joyously talking about the flavors, and then the fight starts. So.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I can't remember, because I watched it last night, but it didn't jump out at me. What jumped out at me, as it always did with this, is that this is one of my all-time favorite death traps. If we can talk about that.
Sure.
You know, there are so many great ones on the show. There are some that are kind of lame, but this is, to me, even, you know, of course it's campy as hell and it's funny, but I loved it. There was something so colorful and exotic about this one was always one that I always remembered, and even after in the intervening years when I didn't see the show, it was one I always would remember. I was like, oh yeah, and they had that episode where they would try to make them into snow cones. And I don't know what about it. I mean, I just imagine that the writer, or whenever they were putting it together, I sometimes think that some of those death traps were, can you top this? And the idea of Mr. Freeze, well, of course he would. You know, in the context of the show, that's what he would try to do with something. He would try to turn them into popsicles or snow cones or whatever. But the image of the two of them in those gigantic cones, the fact first, by the way, that those would even exist, that there would be a gigantic snow cone for them to fit into. It's such a great, you know, of course, Bill Finger made those so popular in the comics. And actually, when in the episode that he did deal with, I know he did at least one episode. It was the Clock King episode where they're in a gigantic, the gigantic hourglass. It's that same idea that they're in this gigantic thing that's oversized, and I always loved that about that particular death trap. I always thought that it was clever and funny and colorful and captured all the best elements of this show with that one scene.
I agree with you on the death trap itself. I loved it, the large size, but I got to take exception to one thing. And it's, again, one of the things that the second season starts doing more and more is the shortcuts. Batman comes up with a way to escape. And it's great. He talks about the plumbing of this thing and how they can, and it's great. But here's the problem. We don't see it take effect. No. He says, we can do this. And it's like, boom, we cut away, and now they're driving back to the Batcave. I never liked when the show took the shortcuts with scenes that were telegraphed more than actually shown.
Telling rather than showing. Yeah, right. I agree. That's a fair point.
But as they're getting out of it, we see that the image tarnishing has continued because now there's an image of Batman wearing Gordon's stolen watch.
Yeah.
Oh, but my question to you is this. Because I don't think he explained it, why did Mr. Freeze continue to do this if he thought Batman was dead?
I guess that's a plot hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just simply a plot hole. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. And he's going to think he's dead up until we get to the very end when they run into each other again. So it was one thing I just didn't understand, and because of it, Batman decides that Batman and Robin should take a break and let the public think what they will, which I didn't get entirely either. Was he doing it because his ego was deflated, or was this all some part of a big plan that we just weren't let in on? I just, because his thing is, let's just go into town and run some errands for Aunt Harriet. I'm like,
yeah, let's go. Well, again, a lot of these plot holes, and you're right, it's thin. And it's thin because all they're really doing is setting up the scene where Bruce Wayne gets to see this little boy go, boo, Batman and Robin, and then he gets to deliver that tremendous, and he does it with such a great deadpan. Adam West does, and this is where he's underrated, and people would confuse the character with the actor.
Gosh, Bruce, did you hear that?
Nothing has ever cut me so deeply to the quick. No blow ever struck by any arch-villain has ever hurt me so acutely as that little boy's boo.
And it's just the way he delivers that line. And then, of course, they cut the timing of it. They cut right away to the next scene. And that's all that is. It's just a way of giving them an excuse to have a scene like that. And then, of course, it's also paid off down the road later on at the very end of the episode. But you're right. There are plot holes. And a lot of those, and that's, as the series wore on, you do get the sense, where they were much more interested, they were much more careful about crafting their plots early on. And then after a while, there was a certain sameness to them. So the plots took a back seat to the scenes, if that makes any sense. If they were just saying, well, let's have a scene where this happens. All right, well, let's get us from point A to point B, and then come up with a way to do it. It didn't always make much sense, but then they would just get to that scene, and you'd enjoy that scene, and they'd link it together. But you're right. If he thought Batman was dead, why would he continue this anti-Batman campaign? You would think that he already had everything that he wanted except Miss Iceland's love. But it's just an excuse for us, the viewer, to get to see a scene of Bruce and Dick go to the drugstore and seeing this little kid, boo, Batman.
Yes. And just prior to that, there's a scene in Gordon's office where he's having another press conference. And, there's Majors again pounding away on Gordon and trying to get him to explain where's Batman, what's going on here and stuff. This would have been a perfect opportunity because a few weeks before, O'Hara had it out with Gordon in the Minstrel episode about who is Batman exactly. I mean, we put so much trust in this guy. And, of course, Gordon flies off the handle. He's like, how dare you? How dare you? But this would have been a great follow-up if they could have, again, I know continuity was not the first thing they thought of in doing this show. But when you have those moments of character building like that, and like I say, this thing with Majors, like if she could have been a recurring character who could have, been a problem for Batman, questioned his motives, even gotten into the whole Snoopy reporter Lois Lane without falling in love with Batman thing, it would have been interesting for the show. But they never went that way. She was a one and done for this episode.
I never thought of that, but you are right. That would have been an interesting way of having Batman have something that he had to deal with that wasn't just the villain of the week, that there was kind of this undercurrent of someone snooping around. And you're right, it would have added an element to it. But, they really were making it up as they were going along, as they did this show. There was no grand plan. They basically were milking it for as long as they could, as hard as they could. And even by this time in the season, the wheels were starting to come off in the sense that, and I don't mean that necessarily creatively, because it was, again, an up and down season all the way through. But the ratings had been starting to slide. People had already gotten the joke. People were already by this time starting to move on, and there was already this sense that if they were going to come back for a third episode, they were going to have to do something different. Which is, if you remember, when did you said this ran in November of '66?
Right.
See, this was right around the time that behind the scenes they were thinking about season 3 and about getting a Batgirl into action.
Right.
There's even actually a reference toward the end of season 2 where Gordon makes reference to his daughter at college.
Yes.
And I think he even calls her Barbara. And they were behind the scenes already plotting, as the story goes, that DC was working with the producers to develop Batgirl, and she was introduced early in '67 in the comics, and I think actually the issue might have actually come out like in December of '66. So they were already laying the groundwork for some different things down the road. So which again indicates that they already knew that they had an issue on their hands with some of the sameness. They were just kind of, I just watched it again recently where the famous Saturday Night Live routine with William Shatner, where they do the Star Trek convention. Do you know the skit I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, I know. The Get
a
a
Life. Yeah, the Get a Life. Yeah, it's fair. Just watched it this week for reasons that actually having to do with the story that I'm working on. And I watched it, and it's devastatingly funny. The thing that Shatner says is that, this was a job. This was something that we just kind of did. We weren't thinking about continuity. We weren't thinking about the logic of things. It was just, it is what it, it was what it was. And the continuity that existed in the same way that, and there's a parallel between the shows. We know the Klingons are the bad guys and the Romulans are the bad guys. But, when it comes to details, about the intricacies of, the timelines and plot lines, and particularly, early on in Star Trek, and the same thing goes for Batman, they just weren't thinking about stuff. And certainly by this time in the history of the show, they really were just making it up. And if they wanted to do a scene, they would find a way to do it. And there were a lot of plot holes in the way that it was done, because it was a lot more style over substance by this time in the show.
That's a good way of looking at it, though. Yeah, definitely style over substance when it came to the series, because everybody thought, oh, this worked out. You had, this actor playing, a vibrant role. Let's. I like that. I like that a lot. We cut back to Freeze, and he's wondering how it is the press has not gotten around to mentioning the passing of Batman, but that's because Gordon hasn't revealed, as we see in the press conference. This is an interesting scene because Freeze goes into this whole thing about what his plan is about freezing Gotham and the $1 million he wants to save the city and such. The whole time he's pontificating, we're treated to a sample of the submarine music from the Batman movie, which is so weird. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit overdramatic.
Yeah, I always liked it actually when they would start bringing the music in from the movie into the show. But you're right, it is weird.
Yeah. Oh, I liked it too if it worked, but just in this case it doesn't, because we're actually going to get some more music from the movie shortly. Bruce and Dick go visit Police Commissioner Gordon's office. They learn about Freeze's plans for the $1 million. He wants it by noon the next day, or he will deep freeze Gotham City.
Was it $1 million or $1 billion?
Did I say $1 million? I'm sorry, I meant $1 billion.
Yeah,
it is $1 billion, which is also unique, because usually these characters just want a couple of million or $500,000, or even the Minstrel was good with $250,000 a week. I mean, Freeze comes right out of the gate with $1 billion. That's a lot of money. And it's funny because, later on you got Lindsay or Linseed, I should say, and Gordon and them going, there's no way we could. And I'm like thinking to myself, you really can't raise. And then I'm thinking, it's 1960s. Yeah, they really can't raise $1 billion in such a short period of time. Right.
That, in a sense, makes sense to the plot given the time that it was written. Now it's like, they actually probably could have done it. But, then it's like, forget about it. There was no way they were going to get $1 billion in 24 hours.
And they couldn't even turn to Bruce Wayne for help.
Right, because he was a Playboy millionaire, but he was not a billionaire.
Exactly. Yeah. He has helped them in the past with other, ransoms and money and such, but this is beyond even his capabilities. And Freeze shows a demonstration of his power by freezing the city's water system.
Yes.
So if like Gordon tried to cut off the news and try and keep the panic under control, he can't. And panic quickly grips the city, as the newscaster tells us.
Here it is, the hottest day of the year, and they said the water reservoir in Gotham City Park is frozen solid, which it never has been before, even on the coldest day of the year. And then the newsmen learned of the diabolical scheme of Mr. Freeze to completely cover Gotham City with ice, unless $1 billion is paid to him before high noon tomorrow. Since the announcement, less than 2 hours ago, panic has hit the streets. Motorists have jammed the highways leading out of Gotham City. Traffic through the Gotham City tunnel is blocked for 3 miles. This afternoon, everything is complete chaos. Terror reigns.
Yes. Yes.
About the children screaming, please, which is kind of dark. Please don't freeze me.
But it's funny. It's all but you're right. And they've done that before on the show also, where they would have this very serious announcer delivering this news that is inherently absurd. But yes, they would always illustrate the panic, and people are, oh my God, even when there's like an early episode where when they think Batman's dead and Anne Harriet is like over the top grieving, and people start gathering at Wayne Manor for no reason, to pay their respects to Batman. But it's like, don't freeze me, don't freeze me. It's just it's funny.
To me, this is where this episode's having its problems, because now we get to the next morning. We see that Bruce, Dick, Aunt Harriet, Alfred, they've been up all night watching the news coverage. Probably one of the few times that Gotham City TV's been on the air 24 hours, because it's 1960s and such. And, Bruce convinces Aunt Harriet to go and have a rest while he and Dick head off. And it's like, we don't really get this whole understanding of what triggered him, other than it's a last-ditch effort. Let's put on the costumes and do something.
Right. Well, there is a real lag there, because you even the fact that once they had escaped, why do Bruce and Dick go to Commissioner Gordon's office at all as Bruce and Dick? It doesn't really make sense. I mean, usually in the past when that sort of thing happens, and they thought, "Oh, I thought you were gone, Caped Crusader." No, Commissioner, here we are. Again, it's a plot hole in service to what they want to have pay off down the road. But it doesn't make much sense at all.
Now, mind you, like you said, scenes, moments that are created rather than servicing the whole plot. But this is a great scene. Then we cut to Gordon's office, and like they said, they don't have enough time. Freeze calls them. He's not willing to give them more time. Gordon's standing there by the bat phone. He's got his hand on the glass. He's got
What can we do, Commissioner?
Do? I honestly don't know, Mayor Linseed. If only...
Go ahead, Commissioner. Call Batman and Robin. If Gotham City ever needed them, she needs them now.
I never thought it would happen. But like so many others, I'm afraid I've lost faith.
And they're like, do it. Even O'Hara's like, do it. Call him. And he goes, I can't bring myself. Even fanboy Gordon has lost his faith.
Yes. I didn't think it was possible. Yeah, I know. And actually, that is the undercurrent of the episode, and I think I said this earlier. that doesn't really make sense. I mean, it was the same reason. It was the same thing with the Penguin running for mayor against Batman, as if that was possible, you know. And I know that sounds even stupid to say that, but it's like that's the one thing about the show is that there was no way they had established that he was such a do-gooder, that he was such a Boy Scout, that he was so incorruptible that even this scene just rings hollow because it's more. Okay, it's funny, you know, Gordon's given up on Batman, but it doesn't really make any sense.
See, I don't know. In talking about it now and in thinking about it and such, I mean, there have been a lot of people that we've put up on pedestals in our time, and for some way, shape, or form, you know, we find that they've got their flaws. They've got, you know, that they can be brought down. I mean, even just a few years ago here in New York State, we had Elliot Spitzer, who was this shining. I mean, my God, this guy was going after everybody. He was freaking Elliot Ness of the late 20th century, the way this guy was being portrayed and such. And he comes along and he's our governor and, you know, good times are coming. And, oh, he likes call girls, you know. It's possible, and especially when, and I think that's part of what they were trying to do here, but the problem is it still made no sense. Batman and Robin are out of the picture. I mean, that press conference with Majors and such, and, you know, it's like, well, where's Batman? Why don't you call him? And Gordon's not, you know, there's no answers. So the press is running wild with this story that we can be swayed by our media. Even the most revered person, you know, if the media does it right, we can look down upon someone.
Well, Nellie Majors does. I mean, she does say that in that first scene where she appears, where she says, "You know, we've seen heroes brought low before." You're right. I mean, that's very much that old notion. I mean, it's not like it was invented late in the 20th century, or in mid 20th century, obviously. But my feeling about it is that I guess it comes to a matter, and not to take it, you know, not to go too seriously with it, but it's just not foreshadowed. There's another. I mean, it happens so quickly. Mm-hmm. The idea that people would all of a sudden, you know, not believe that this was some kind of ruse, or particularly Gordon. You know, the ultimate, like you say, you call him fanboy Gordon. It's true. He's the ultimate fanboy. The idea that he would lose faith, knowing what he already knows that had been happening before behind the scenes. He has to know that something isn't quite right. But the fact that he gives up is again, it's just the idea. It's an opportunity for the writers to give us a scene where even Gordon gives up on Batman, but it doesn't make any sense.
I could see that. I mean, I guess I just liked it just because after so many fanboy moments.
Oh yeah, it's fun. It's funny to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, and right from the very beginning, even that whole loving, you know, I knew you'd come and save me thing, and then at the end, but it happens towards the end. I mean, it out of everybody else. Well, see, that's the thing. Everybody else was losing faith. Even O'Hara says, push the button, call him. Yeah. This is O'Hara who's had his doubts. He's saying call him.
Right.
You know? We come back to the next act, and it's a nice touch, although, again, considering we don't fully understand the motives of why they stayed out of action for so long, it's a nice touch with them showing that the two are back in action as they get back into the Batmobile.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
It's always a treat.
It was a treat, yeah. You know, and they roar off to the cold storage plant, which Batman, you know, see, and this is a problem I've got. He waited this long to come to the conclusion that, oh, Mr. Freeze showed up rather suddenly at the Frosty Freezies. Maybe he's hiding out in the cold storage plant.
Yeah, I know. I know. See, for me, I don't, you know, it's funny, whether it's this episode or a lot of the others, that sort of thing I just kind of roll with, simply because, you know, for me, what I like about this episode is that I like, with the one thing that we haven't touched on, I actually don't like the attempt that they tried at giving Mr. Freeze the catchphrase, wild, vile.
Yes.
It was so heavy-handed, and it just didn't work. But what I love about this episode are those moments. The moment in the pool, the Frosty Freezy, and Otto Preminger as Mr. Freeze. And he's, you know, all of the three different Mr. Freezes all have their attributes. But the look of this particular Mr. Freeze, I absolutely love. I love the big bald head and and the bushy eyebrows and the suit. Although I wanted to see him in a helmet, that's the only thing that was missing. But he looks like Mr. Freeze, and he acts like Mr. Freeze, or how we would think that he would act, as the way he was portrayed at the time. Very different than George Sanders, who was great also in a different way. But it's funny when I'm watching these shows now, a lot of them, I'm just kind of, some of the stuff I just start to tune out when it comes to this, like, okay, move on to the next set piece. And I think probably the writers were doing the same. It was just they would string along these little bits until they could get to the climactic scene. And you are absolutely right that, when you point out all these plot holes, they very much do exist. It doesn't make much sense. But on the upside, we get the very funny performance by Otto Preminger as Mr. Freeze, and some of the other elements that we do get in this episode.
I see what you're saying there. I just, in view of what we saw in the first season, which was more thought out.
Yes.
It's a little bit disappointing. And the fact that there are, and I've said it before, like, going back a few weeks to the Minstrel episode. As a kid, I never liked the Minstrel, but as an adult, I actually really love that episode. I'm sad about the wasted potential for a villain who could have been a recurring villain, for one thing, who was the technological genius on the same level as Batman. So when I see something like this where, like you say, it's stringing along to get to... This isn't even just a wasted... Well, actually, it is wasted, because Preminger was good. You're right. And we'll talk more about it also at the end. But, when all his scenes are just him, going back and forth with Miss Iceland, going, "You love me, no, I don't."
Right. No, you're right about that. I don't like those scenes much at all. I think that that's forced. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think that she had much going for. I mean, I don't want to be unkind. You're right. It was repetitive. It was forced. It didn't. They had no chemistry. Mm-hmm. And you would at least have wanted some kind of chemistry there. And you're right about all of those things. I don't disagree with you at all. It's just that I don't know. Maybe it's. When you're coming to the second season, you have to kind of take the good with the bad, because there are a lot of... You really do start seeing the cracks in where the show was at the time. And a lot of it also was that, they were filming a lot of things, concurrently with other elements of the show. So there is a lot of inconsistency based on simply on the way that they produced the show and the way they wrote the show and the way that it was handled. And and you are right about the... I mean, part of it is I think that the greater hand that early on that Lorenzo Semple Jr. had, there was a more of a consistency of vision. There was a more consistency of an idea of what was going on. Also, and it's funny, and this is coming from the comic book fan in me, is that I don't think it's any accident that those first season episodes that were more based on actual comic book stories, they actually had more of a template. These were stories that had beginnings, middles, and ends, and they were able to, embellish them or switch them around a little bit, even to the point of sometimes switching out entire characters. But they picked good stories. I mean, they looked at the comics and the Aval Ekdal episode. That's a great episode. Yes. And it's out of the gate. And all of that, and even though they changed, the gender around so they could, do all of that, yes, there was inconsistent, a lot of problematic issues. They were trying to, because the shows, what everybody had responded to, we look at it, as fans and as people who enjoy a good story and all of that. This was a fad. And at the time that this was being produced, the things that were getting attention were the silliness, the colorfulness, the villains, the death traps. So all they would really do was find a way to play up those aspects, and the story was secondary. They weren't telling necessarily great stories, but they were giving you highly entertaining set pieces. And so I don't think that you're off base at all in pointing that out. But I think in the context of the time, that's what the show was going through. And I think that the writers were simply just trying to give the people what they thought they wanted. And obviously, in retrospect, it's not. Because at that point, people were starting to walk away from the show. And they probably should have been paying more attention to story. And they probably should have been paying attention more developing other ideas, which they tried to do by bringing in Batgirl a little bit later on. But yes, you're right. By this time in the show, they were, the cracks were showing.
let me ask you, what was the whole point of the antenna scene?
Oh,
Why? Why couldn't they just sneak right? I mean, even if, and my first thought was, okay, the roof door may be locked from the outside, so they need someone to come out and open the door. So they do that to get one of them to come out. I'm like thinking Batman couldn't pick the lock?
Of course not.
They head downstairs.
Mr. Freeze, I believe.
Batman, but you were supposed to be a famous Frosty Freezy by now.
Exactly what we wanted you to believe. Robin, wait!
Look there.
Batman.
Why, you beast! You sinful beast!
You're a human. An absolute demon.
Human demon? Wild. Why don't you join me in my frozen, frigid world? Perhaps you would like to be our best Iceman at the wedding. You and Robin. Boys!
We get a bat fight as, they fight, but we get the movie bat fight music for this one, which is nice.
That was always a bonus to me whenever they would do that.
Mm-hmm. But in the course of the fight, the two of themselves get themselves trapped in one of the jail cells. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wild. Simply
Holy chicken coop.
And a nice gold chicken coop, boy wonder. I have just one telephone call to make, and then I'll finish you off forever.
It was a good idea of yours to wear our bat thermal underwear.
I think your idea is the one that'll save us, Robin.
Commissioner Gordon speaking.
This is Mr. Freeze speaking.
It's he.
Are you listening?
Yes, we're listening. What's your proposition?
You know my proposition. $1 billion by noon or you freeze to death. Simple.
Mr. Freeze, hear me out. We can't raise $1 billion in such a short time. Do you understand? We can't get that much money by noon.
You have exactly 26 minutes, that's all.
Mr. Freeze, give us more time. We need more time.
Time for what? To wait for Batman, perhaps? If you're waiting for the dynamic, you will forget it. They're my prisoners here in my hideout, and soon they'll be Iceman, real Iceman. $1 billion in 26 minutes.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid all is lost.
Well, gentlemen, the expression is, I believe, time for the kill, curtains for the Caped Crusaders. What happened? You're supposed to be frozen.
We took the precaution of processing our crime-fighting costumes with a special bat antifreeze activating solution.
And rub some on the rest of our bodies.
And so it's curtains for you, Mr. Freeze, not for us.
Not as long as you're in that cage.
We brought along another small surprise. We anticipated trouble here.
And came prepared.
So you have no chance of outwitting us, and even less of glaciating Gotham City.
Is that so?
Cell door. He manages to break this one open. He's got little plastic explosives just like he had before. In the fight, Mr. Freeze is incapacitated when his freeze collar is knocked off him. So they've got he's got Miss Iceland in a literal block of ice. They free her from that, and they put him in there. So this way he's able to survive, and he can't go anywhere. Because this time around also, we don't have, like we had in the first season, the hot and cold areas of the hideout. Not that he needs it, because he's got the jet nozzles to keep him cool the whole time. So that's saved actually on special effects.
Right. I missed that about all the subsequent Mr. Freeze episodes. I absolutely love the red and blue thing. In fact, that thing that I mentioned earlier, where I wrote at 13th Dimension, the 13 things that I loved. I think that was one of the things that I listed was just Mr. Freeze in general, and the fact that they all had their attributes. But I always loved that red and blue. I always thought that was so inventive and such a neat idea. And that's where also the original that George Sanders episode is based on the original Mr. Freeze story, or Mr. Zero story from the comics.
Right.
But they had a different solution to the warm and cold, where I think he had like warm, they were couches or something in the comic where they were like heated couches that they could sit on so that they didn't freeze to death being his henchmen. But the idea of the red and blue thing I absolutely love. And I never understood why they didn't go back to it. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was a budget thing. Maybe it was a, I don't know. It didn't seem like it was all that expensive a special effect, but I loved it. And I did miss it in this episode. I was like, that was such a cool idea. They should have kept going with that.
Oh, I definitely think it was a budgetary thing. I think it had something to do with the cost of the effects. Because also, this time around, his multi-purpose gun only freezes people.
Yeah, they stopped it with the heat laser that they used the first time around.
Yeah. So we come to the end, the epilogue here. Batman and Robin are in Commissioner Gordon's office, and they're talking about, how... Mr. Freeze has to be handled while he's there, so let Warden Crichton know this. And I'm like thinking, wouldn't Crichton know this already?
Yeah, of course.
But, again, I know. It's these little things that now as someone who's, again, justifying my love, but part of it also is that I really would like to see a mythology expand here. And these little things bug me when you see people forget these basic things. I know it wasn't an issue in the 60s. I know it doing cyborgs. It wasn't an issue in the 70s with $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman either. It was that week's episode, and sometimes your characters would change to suit the needs of the story being told.
Right.
We get the outside of Gordon's office again, though, as Batman and Robin is waiting there. And this is weird, though. The kid who booed, he's just hanging out.
He's hanging out at police headquarters.
In the 13th floor of police headquarters. He got all the way upstairs. And there's nobody there waiting with him.
The commissioner's office, yes.
Oh.
And now, am I look, when they get in the elevator together and Batman's holding the kid's hand or whatever, am I the only one who thinks that's a little creepy?
I was just thinking the same thing.
There's something about that. I'm always like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And again, of course, we're looking at that through 21st century eyes and all of that. And at the time, I'm sure it was just a kind of funny and campy, the idea of Batman making up with this little kid who had turned on him and all of that. But it just seems weird.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. I saw that. I was just like, oh, don't ride the elevator. Tell him you'll meet them downstairs or something.
Exactly. Oh, boy.
A police headquarters that lets a kid roam around freely, stand outside the commissioner's office on the 13th floor, and then get into an elevator with two tightly costumed men. It's just...
Yeah. I don't know about that.
Yeah. And we conclude with, once again, something else that does annoy me about the show is Gordon looking straight at the camera and proclaiming his love for Batman once again.
Yes.
Those camera mugging scenes always bugged me, even as a kid.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was that's the thing is that especially when you're dealing with the tone of the show, is that their best moments really were the deadpan moments. Mm-hmm. When they were really kind of milking it is when it just didn't work. And you're right, those scenes where you go, a lot of Gordon's speeches and his proclamations of love and dedication to Batman were unnecessary. And there are times where I'd be sitting there saying, "Okay, come on, get on with it. Let's go. Let's get to the next scene." And you're right, that is it's a little much.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of this episode, let's look at a few elements here. First of all, Mr. Freeze back again, and we touched on a lot of this already. He's a lot more flamboyant, not as underplayed in many respects, the way George Sanders played him. He's also a little bit more deadly, in my opinion. George Sanders always said, his Mr. Freeze was always, "I don't want to kill if I don't have to."
Right. No guns, exactly.
Otto Preminger's version takes more of a glee on it. And of course that whole thing of always going wild, it's very different from Sanders' performance. He doesn't need the covering, as you pointed out, because he's got the jet nozzles. I think in a way, I know what you're saying. I miss the helmet too, the whole head covering. But considering he allows himself to do the whole transformation and have the silvery cold skin, you wouldn't want to cover it up.
No, you wouldn't. I mean, I think those are things that they figured out. I mean, you could barely... The thing about... To me, the knock on the George Sanders... First off, George Sanders' performance is actually tremendous, and it's one of my favorites in the entire series. And it's the one thing that they did know how to do for the most part, on the show, is that they would write their villains to whoever it was that were playing them. And they would play up their action. Now, of course, Otto Preminger really wasn't an actor. He was a director. But it fit. It really, really worked. His accent, his whole style worked very, very well with that. George Sanders, of course, had been known as this very debonair, very stylish, very, he had very sophisticated. So you have him in his smoking jacket and his ascot, which, of course, actually, again, people don't even realize this. When you go back to the original Batman Mr. Freeze story, or Mr. Zero story, he dresses like that. He actually dressed like that. It was only when he went out when he would wear the helmet costume. And, of course, in the comics originally it was purple and green, which is so strange. But when he wasn't out and about, when he was in his lair, he would dress like he was like a millionaire. And that very much fit with the George Sanders style. And it fit very much with the first season, where you could kind of get away with that a little bit. By this time, particularly in the second season, everything needed to be over the top. Everything was flamboyant and colorful. So they dispensed with a lot of that stuff, and they played with Otto Preminger's look. I mean, this big, bald-headed, it's actually in my mind when I look at the three Mr. Freezes, Eli Wallach being the third, the one who I think actually looked like Mr. Freeze was Otto Preminger. I would have liked to have seen a helmet, but you almost think he's wearing a helmet because he's got those collars. So right. And he's got the bald head. And I know this sounds strange, but it wasn't until I was watching it again as an adult that I realized that he never wears a helmet. And I always thought he had a helmet, but no, he doesn't. It gives you that illusion because of the bald head, the collar. It makes you think that that's, that it's there, or at least it does for me. I can't speak for everybody, but that's the way I kind of always see it. But, George Sanders was a different kind of actor, and he played a different kind of role. And so he actually, pardon the pun, he played a much cooler Mr. Freeze than Otto Preminger. And, of course, really what Eli Wallach did was basically the Otto Preminger version, but just without saying wild all the time. But that was pretty much the same thing. He was also vamping it up.
Now, as far as Otto Preminger, I thought was interesting in looking through different things about him and such. Yeah, he was known primarily as a director. In fact, this was his first acting gig in something like 11 or 14 years, something like that. And he couldn't appear on the series until he paid off $11,000 in back dues that he owed to the Screen Actors Guild.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so, because he hadn't acted for so long, so I guess he figured, why should I pay,
Right,
But if he wanted to appear, he had to, so the part of that $2,500 that he got for appearing on the show, that got eaten away pretty quickly. He was apparently very difficult to work with on the series because, as a director, he was like, you really shouldn't do it this way. But they were smart. They had George Wagner, who was 71 years old at the time himself. He was older than Preminger. So basically, he was able to, shut up, kid. I'm the director. I'm going to do... Because if they had put a younger director in there, Preminger probably would have wrote all over him. Yeah,
Preminger, from what I've read, he was not easy to deal with on the set. And then he did try to interfere with Wagner's direction and try to tell him what's what. And I think, I don't know this for sure, but it might have played a part into why he did not come back. Because he was supposed to be difficult on the set, from what I've heard, that he was not one of the actor's favorite people to have around either.
No, even he had worked with Alan Napier in a movie previously, and Napier was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm working with this guy again. So, but, in looking at the two performances, yes, Preminger really went in for the role. He allowed himself to look like Mr. Freeze. I still have to say I prefer George Sanders' version, though. I prefer the more chilled, cool... It's funny, because if you think about it, what we eventually get and what, like, for instance, the animated series will build on is sort of a mix of the two.
Yeah, yes, it is, because he's got that kind of that colder demeanor. I think a lot of it has to do with the look. The modern, when people think of Mr. Freeze now, if they're not thinking of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and please don't think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, it is that version that was in the animated series. They really did redefine the character. That episode of the show where they gave Mr. Freeze a motivation, and this tragic motivation, it turned him into a character that nobody ever thought that he would ever be. And it's a funny thing, too, is that Mr. Freeze, and again, this is another thing where the show is kind of a contribution to Batman at large, was not a character who was really well known at the time. Remember, he originally was Mr. Zero. He had only appeared the one time. When they brought him into the show, they changed his name, called him Mr. Freeze, which is a better name, and he was on the show enough times that they started bringing him back into the comics. And yet, at the same time, you didn't really see him that often in the comics, and he kind of stayed in consciousness because of syndication. People thought of Mr. Freeze as being a main villain of Batman's, and yet it wasn't until that Batman animated series episode, in terms of, you know, the hardcore comics fans, where he kind of became almost an A-list villain. That now you see him routinely. He is in the comics all the time now. He's a regular go-to villain. But it all really kind of started with the show, regardless of which version you're talking about, whether it's George Sanders or Otto Preminger or Eli Wallach.
Okay, let me ask you a trivia question. This is from, I don't know if you've got your copy, Joel Eisner's official Batman Batbook?
I haven't, but it's not in front of me.
Okay. You probably, I mean, because we've already discussed this already, but this is the trivia question from it. Okay. What were the flavors that the dynamic duo were sitting in on the Frosty Freeze death trap that they were going to be turned into?
Oh, it was, I do think I said before, it was pineapple, I think, for Batman, and lime for Robin.
That's it. There you go.
There you go. All right, what do I win? I win a Bat Gold Star, I guess.
There you go. One of those Bat decals that he used, the shiny ones. All right.
I love those. That was one of them.
Was there a Bat gadget in this episode that stood out to you? I'm going to say, for me, no.
Yeah, I can't think of any.
Okay, so we get to the end of the episode. You are Robin the Boy Wonder. You've watched this with Batman, and, you know, the credits are rolling. You turn to Batman, and you exclaim, "Holy what?" How would you sum up this whole episode in an exclamation from Robin?
I don't know, holy popsicle, holy ice cream man, Batman. I don't know. Yeah, holy ice cream man, Batman. Because I mean, he escaped in an ice cream truck, I guess. Yeah, I mean, something like that, I suppose. I mean, you know, the funny thing is, in talking to you, I holy missed opportunity, Batman. You know, would also be, because you're right. When you really kind of look at it, there are a lot of things that they definitely could have done better in this episode. But I'd go with the, holy ice cream man, Batman, or, holy cold freeze, Batman.
You can appreciate what's wrong, but at the same time, you're willing to be a lot more forgiving than I am. Me, I'm like, holy quick thaw. This was an episode that just, it didn't work for me. It doesn't help that there wasn't much depth to this story that there should have been. Maybe because we had such a fuller episode in the first season. Forget about even I can put aside, okay, we got Preminger and he's playing him off a little differently and such than Sanders. But the Sanders episode had more meat to it. There was more substance. So when you bring back a returning villain, you expect, I mean, even the King Tut episode, as much as I'm not a huge fan these days of Victor Buono as King Tut and such, even his return episode still had more it followed along that this was King Tut, and this is, he was consistent in that regard with story-wise. It just didn't happen here.
That's interesting that you do say that, too, because and it might have been also because they figured, let's just start over because we've got a different actor. In the same way that John Astin's shtick was very different than Frank Gorshin's shtick. They were called the Riddler, but they were very different characters. Yeah. The thing with King Tut, just as a counterpoint, it was one of the few times where they actually kept his backstory as... First off, it was one of the few times they actually bothered with a backstory. The idea that he was this professor and he'd been hit on the head. And they would use that consistently. They actually had that, a few cases where they had continuity between appearances, where they would refer to things that had happened before. A lot of times they just didn't even bother. It's where sometimes the repetition would come in, where, if last time they fought Mr. Freeze and they were wearing their thermal B underwear or whatever it was, why didn't they this time? It's because the writers either forgot or didn't care. And the reason I'm able to forgive a lot of that stuff is maybe it's because I know how they produced the show, and I know you do too, and maybe I just find that the fact that this is a case of a show where it is what it is, and they were producing a lot of this stuff on the fly, And yeah, it doesn't all hold together. And you're right, there are a lot of parts of this episode that don't hold together. Another one I would point to is that I look back at as a quick aside, because that's not what this episode is about, but when I think of the Penguin Joker 3-parter, I remember that so fondly as a kid. It seemed like an event whenever they would have it, that I watch it as an adult. It really doesn't hold together at all. There are great moments, though, that make it last. There are great bits to it that make it last. And that's how I look at this episode, that you're right. There are a lot of parts of it that don't hold together, but there are enough set pieces that I find really, really exciting and fun that I think of it as a favorite episode because of Otto Preminger's performance, because of the pool scene, because of the Frosty Freezies, those episodes. I don't like the bit with the kid. I don't like the bit where they doubt Batman without any real... there's no real reason to do so. It's just in service of advancing, a pretty thin plot. But there's enough there. There's enough colorfulness there that I find it to be a fun episode.
All right. Well, that's the beauty of this. I mean, a few weeks ago, I talked about Barker with Jay Smith, and he wasn't happy with the episode. I was willing to forgive the flaws it had, because I did enjoy that particular episode and found it to be stronger, but Jay couldn't, and that's...
Yeah, I'm with him. I'm not we were, before we even got rolling, we were discussing. That's an episode that I can barely watch, those in the Shame episodes are ones that I can barely stand to watch again.
See, now I'm going to be really curious to see how, when we get to Shame, because as a kid, I loved them. I love them as a kid, and I don't know if I'm going to feel that same way. I'm hoping I do. I mean, I'm thinking Stanley Ralph Ross, he wrote the episodes. Hopefully this is going to hold up, but I refuse to go ahead until we get to those episodes, So it'll be interesting to see. But that, again, that's the beauty, is that, everybody comes to it with what they remember, what they, and then what they feel now in watching it, and what they want from it, too. And sometimes I think that's the thing. It's like some of those people who are just so negative about the show, they really just don't want what what the Batman 66 show has to offer, and it does have a lot to offer.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that what's nice to see now is that a lot of that negativity has faded away.
Yes.
I think that it's there are people of our generation who the fans who've kind of kept the flame alive, who love the show. And I think, again, since so much has happened between that time and now, that it's found a whole new audience. I mean, look at the recent San Diego Comic-Con this year. There was a whole Batman TV show undercurrent where they were not only just were the bags, but the hotel key cards were Batman and Robin, and all of the merchandise that continues to come out. I mean, this stuff is... There's great stuff that just continues to be produced on a regular basis, and that clearly means if they're continuing to make it, that means people are buying it. If people are buying it, it's because they love it, and I think that's great.
That is great. That is great. Dan, before we wrap things up here, tell everybody how they can follow along with your writings, the blog, the website, anything else you want to promote here. This is a good opportunity to let us know.
Oh, sure. 13thdimension.com is the name of the website. I write a couple times a day. I write about Batman 66 on a regular basis. It is a constant presence. Also, I'd like to point out that I've interviewed Adam West and Burt Ward and Julie Newmar. We also do a lot of coverage of the merchandise, and we, not to be too boastful, but I've got an inside track with some of the manufacturers. And frequently, we're the first place that gets information on action figures and maquettes, the stuff that Tweeterhead does, the stuff that Figures Toy Company is doing. So if you're looking for news along those lines as well, give us a look. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. And our regular presence is on those social media sites. Plus, also, just worth, I want to point out that besides Batman 66, I personally write a lot about Batman, whether it's Batman in the 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s. Currently, we do a lot of modern coverage. I always have a Bat Book of the week, whatever's coming out that week. I always pick out which Bat Book is worth a look because I'm still very much current. We interview comics writers, comics artists, and we're more than Batman and DC. We do Marvel, we do Image, we do a lot of Boom Studios, one of my favorite comic companies. Also, a lot of writers and artists actually contribute to the site as well. You know, they let us know what they like, and I'm having a blast with it. It's a wonderful time, and it's afforded me an opportunity to do stuff like this podcast. You know, it's funny. I loved this show since I was a child, but now to be able to have a forum to kind of sing its praises is something that I'm really happy about, and it's really, really extremely gratifying.
I'll, be putting links for the Facebook page and for the actual website in the show notes as well. Just one thing to note, if you're not checking our show notes out, it's 13th, the number 13, thdimension.com.
Correct.
So this way people know.
It's 13th, 13th, dimension.com, yeah.
There you go. Great. Well, Dan, thank you so much for this. I really do appreciate it.
John, I really appreciate you having me. I've had a great time, and if you're ever looking for a guest to talk about future episodes, feel free to give me a shout, because believe me, I could go on and on and on. As you can tell, I could go on and on and on about this stuff. Thank you very much for having me.
We'll definitely be talking about this. Folks, stay tuned next week.
Next week, rematch. Batman versus the Joker.
With one of his most unusual capers in the entire series. And joining me to discuss this episode is Rev News host and Dragon Con American Sci-Fi Classics track moderator, Gary Mitchell. So until then, citizens, thanks so much for listening, chums. Take care. Dan, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, chums. I don't have a bat phone, but you can contact the Batcave Podcast through its Facebook page, Twitter, email at thebatcavepodcast@gmail.com, or by phone at 888-866-9010. Subscribe to the podcast via Libsyn.com, that's LIBSYN.com, or through iTunes. The Batcave Podcast is part of a series of pop culture podcasts from the Chronic Rift Network. Find them at chronicrift.com. So until next time, citizens, same bat time, same Batcave Podcast.
Hello there, young man.
I knew you were up here, Batman. I saw the Batmobile downstairs.
Let's take an elevator ride.
Gee, Batman, you're the greatest.
False pride is indeed a dangerous thing, Chief O'Hara.
False pride? We were talking about beauty contests.
I'm talking about myself. How hard it is to admit when I'm wrong. But I was wrong. So wrong. When I ever even imagined I was losing my faith in Batman.